Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Infinity Workforce Solutions Fast Forward webinar series. My name is Steve Kessler, and I'll be the host for the program today. We've got a really important topic to talk about today. We're going to talk about the 2024 North American Standard Out of Service. We're going to kind of go through a review. I believe there were some recent updates that became effective in 1st of April. So we have a representative from CVSA that's going to talk about those updates and maybe review some of the updates from last year. I'm also joined today by Mark Ray. Those of you that come on our webinars pretty often will know Mark. Mark's an industry executive for what, 34, 35 years now, Mark, something like that. So we're always glad to have Mark on board with us. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Everyone is muted that has joined the webinar, so we can't hear you. If you need to or want to ask a question, you can type that into the little chat box that's there, or you can use the Q&A box, and we will try to respond to those questions at the end of the presentation. So, Mark, any comments before we get started and I introduce our guest?
No, I think we're absolutely privileged to have Carrie with us today from CVSA. CVSA, for you guys and gals that don't know, is the absolute authority on out of service criteria and violations. They get their input from both industry and enforcement. They're not sitting in a high rise in downtown Chicago making things up. They actually listen to the industry and the enforcement to make our highways safer. So I'm really looking forward to the updates. And I would also say this is a great opportunity to add a little custom content for your drivers, because they need to know what's going on out there in the enforcement world.
Great, thanks, Mark. So without any further delay, let me introduce you all to our guest today. Our guest today is Carrie Wachowski. Carrie is currently the Director of Inspection Programs at CVSA. Carrie's transportation safety career started in 1987 when she joined the Ontario Ministry of Transportation. She advanced through the ranks there, starting as an administrative assistant and worked her way up to head of enforcement program evaluation with the Carrier Safety and Enforcement Branch. Prior to joining CVSA staff in 2017, Carrie served as CVSA's Vehicle Committee Chair for 10 years, co-chair of the North American Inspectors Championship for 4 years, and as a Region 5 president for 1 year. Carrie is a former CVSA Level 1 and Level 6 inspector and North American Standard Instructor Developer. And she is the 2001 NEIC Jimmy K. Emmons Grand Champion. So without any further delay, welcome, Carrie. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Steve. I've got a lot to cover today, but I will tell you the most of what I'm going to cover is any changes to the 2024 North American Standard Out of Service criteria. The first thing I wanted to point out, if any of you get the Out of Service criteria handbook, the handbook itself indicates in gray the changes that are made. So when you get the handbook, if you flip through, you can easily find anything that's been updated from 1 year to the next because it's highlighted in gray. Because I know a lot of industries still like the handbook and you buy the handbook. So in part one is all the driver out of service conditions. There were a few changes. This particular change here can be pretty significant. Basically, if you're a driver or you have a driver that has an HM endorsement on their driver's license, in some cases, the driver's license will be valid for longer than the TSA screening. So this note was added that a U.S. driver's hazardous materials endorsement requires a TSA screening and that hazardous materials determination to be completed every 5 years. So if an inspector runs the driver on inlets or SIDLIS and it shows that the TSA screening is expired, then the hazardous materials endorsement will no longer be valid. And then it bumps up to the out of service criteria where it says you don't have a proper endorsement. So make sure that you make sure that you check to make sure that your driver's TSA screening is valid. And this only applies to trucks that have placardable loads on them. This one probably for the United States, not so significant. Drivers that come from the province of Ontario used to have to produce medical requirements to the US inspectors because the Class D license did not have medical requirements attached to it. But as of last year, Ontario started to have drivers that had a Class D license have a cyclical medical. Therefore, the medical is built into the license as it is for all Class 1 and Class A licenses from Canada. So when they go into the US, then inspectors do not ask drivers from Canada or Mexico, for that matter, to produce evidence of medical requirements because it's built into the license. Similar to what's happening now in the US. If they don't have the medical requirement that is required, then the class of license is downgraded. And so that's what the inspectors actually deal with, which is now what is happening in the United States over the course of time. It's almost all there.
So no changes in the US on the medical.
No.
Okay.
Everything is still being implemented through the state driver's license authorities to build it into the license. And then eventually, if your drivers don't have a valid medical, again, the driver's license will be downgraded.
Gotcha.
So in this particular case, this was changing the site number from 390.3E to 392.15. So not a big deal for drivers or companies, more so for enforcement folks. So that was just a new violation section that FMCSA created. So now if your driver is driving prohibited under the safety sensitive functions in the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse, they are going to be cited under 392.15 rather than 393E. You will see a note that was added that will be removed actually this year, that in some states they hadn't implemented it yet. So until November 18th, some states are still citing 393E. So it's possible you will get cited under that, or it's possible you'll get cited under the new code. After November 24, everyone will be cited under 392.15. This was a question that came up in regard again to the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse. This table has been in the out of service now for about 4 or 5 years, but the question came up from enforcement: does all the prohibition for drug and alcohol clearinghouses also pertain to a driver that's carrying a commercial learner's permit rather than a full CDL? The answer from FMCSA was yes. So this was a simple modification to the table to show that not only does it apply to a current CDL holder, it also applies to a current CLP holder. This one was in regard to, and as you go through the out of service criteria, any inspection bulletins that have come out in the last year or any operational policy 15s that have come out in the last year are highlighted in gray. And there's a title of what you're supposed to go reference in one of these two documents. So this is the first one that comes up, and this is in regard to a new operational policy 15 regulatory guidance. It is in regard to a rebuilt engine. So you'll see here in this VIN plate that the original manufacture date is January 1998. The reason that's important is prior to 2000, you don't need an ELD. So that was the question. The vehicle gets rebuilt and remanufactured in 2016. So is it a 2016 engine or is it a 1998 engine? The guidance that FMCSA provided and the guidance that's in operational policy 15 says it still reverts back to the 1998 engine. So therefore, this particular vehicle, if it doesn't have an ELD, does not need an ELD. So that's what the question is. And that's why the reference to the year 2000. And that is it for part one. It was pretty simple last year in the driver section. The vehicle section had quite a few changes. So the first section, and what I'll explain here first, is that the brake criteria is split into 3 parts. There is the 20% brake calculation section that applies to wheel ends. So that's the section where if you're driving your truck down the road and you've got a tractor trailer unit, you will not be placed out of service until 20% of your brakes in that combination are ineffective. So if you have one brake out of adjustment in a tractor trailer unit, yes, you will have a violation. Yes, you will get CSA points, but you will not be placed out of service because it doesn't meet the 20%. You need 2 brakes out of 10 to place it out. So that's the first section of the brake criteria. So sometimes when you're flipping through the criteria and you're looking at the wording, you forget what section you're in. So the request was actually from enforcement, can we put watermarks in the criteria so you can see what section you're in all the time? So you'll see there on the sides of that page, 20% criterion. Then you move forward and you get into the front steering axle brakes. So now that's the second part of the 20%, where if you've got a contaminated lining, for instance, on the second axle of your tractor trailer, that is one defective brake and you will not be placed out of service. Take that same contamination and put it on a steer axle, now it's automatically out of service because steering axle brake violations are more critical than they are on the rest of the unit because you'll have steering pull left or right. So everything in the B section is part of the 20% criteria, but also automatically placed out of service. So that's the second part. So when you're going through it, when you see an inoperative brake on the steer, now you know it's automatically out of service. And it also counts as one defective brake towards that 20% that I talked about earlier. Then there's the third part. So you get down to the end of the 20% criteria and you'll see there on the left, the end of the 20% brake criterion. Brakes items 1C through Q are standalone brake out of service conditions and not included in the brake criteria. So what that means is everything from spring brake chambers all the way down to PBBT tests and everything in between, that basically affects your entire unit, minus two things. And I'll tell you what the two things are. Spring brake chambers, if you've got a hole in the back of the spring brake chamber, that is an extremely dangerous situation. So that came out of the 20% and it's placed into its own category. If you have a spring brake coming out the back, you're done. Similarly, broken brake drums. You have a broken brake drum, and from my own experience, I went to 2 fatals where that broken brake drum came out and killed somebody. So that too stands alone. You have a broken brake drum, you must be placed out of service, and it's not part of the 20%. Everything else, pretty much, if you've got an air tank falling off, it's going to affect the entire system. So it automatically goes out. If you have a hole in a brake hose, it affects the entire system, so it automatically goes out. So that's the third part. So basically the watermarks were to try and segregate out those 3 parts, indicating to people where they are in the criteria. This one was a note put into the criteria in relation to Inspection Bulletin 2023-03. So all throughout the year, we will update bulletins, write new bulletins for different things that come out. In this particular case, it was in regard to the Hill Start Aid brake hold modes on new power units. So what was happening was inspectors were doing inspections, and when an inspector starts an inspection, 2 things they do, or well, 6 things they do. They bring it in, they release the brakes, they put it in neutral, they chock the wheels, they put the brakes at maximum pressure, and they get the driver to release his brakes. And then they go and they scribe the push rods and measure the brakes. What's happening with the brake hold mode, and if you have this system on your trucks, you need to educate the drivers, because what was happening, the drivers didn't know how to get it off. So they're in the middle of the inspection and the driver applies the brakes and then pushes down the brakes harder. And what happens is the service brakes stay on. So your brake lights stay on and your service brakes stay on. So then when the inspector goes to measure the service brake application, the push rods aren't moving, and or he gets to the back and the brake lights won't come off, and they didn't know why. So they called me, and I'll be honest with you, I didn't know why either. So slowly but surely, talking to the industry, I found out about this brake hold mode that probably a lot of you are aware of, and I didn't know how to deactivate it. So this bulletin tells inspectors and drivers that all you have to do is hit that HSA off switch, and you will deactivate the system. You can deactivate it other ways, and the bulletin talks about that. Like the intent of it is so that when the driver is driving down the road and I live near Toronto, so when he's in Toronto traffic, in order to give his foot a break, he can push his foot down harder and let go of the brake, and it will hold until he accelerates. The problem is he can't do anything like that when he's in an inspection location. So this tells drivers and inspectors how to deal with it when in fact it activates during an inspection. The next change, this one for the longest time, in fact, I think this is the oldest inspection bulletin we have because it was 2006-01. And it used to say that missing and worn camshaft bushings were not violations. However, the change was made in the 20% criteria. So now if you have a missing camshaft bushing, not worn, but completely missing, it is one defective brake towards your 20% calculation. So the inspection bulletin was modified to talk about only worn camshaft bushings are not violations now. Missing bushings are. And the reason for that is in came some issue requests from an inspector who found 4 different brakes, and all 4 were missing the bushings completely. There was pictures. And normally what the bulletin said, if you have worn or missing camshaft bushings, it will result in another brake violation that we could deal with. It usually results in push rod stroke. So if we already had you for push rod stroke, why bother with the missing camshaft bushing? However, in 2 of the 4 cases, the camshaft was moving so much in the spider casting that when the S-cam turned, it was banging up against the drum and it wasn't allowing itself to turn. Therefore, there was no push rod stroke measurement. And the brake manufacturers in the room said, yes, you're getting obviously degraded braking because now you're not pushing up against what you should, which is the rollers contacting the drum. So that's why missing bushings went into the out of service criteria and the bulletin was updated.
And that contributes to the 20%?
Correct. Yes. So you'd have one defective brake towards the 20%, not necessarily out of service if that was the only one. So then the next notation was in the cargo securement section. And this one, if you haul intermodal containers, this is a good one to know because the guidance talks directly contradictory to what the regulation says. The reason that this was even asked was because you'll see in this slide, you'll see a container. And in this particular case, there's more than 2 corner locks. The corner lock is actually further up about another 5 feet from the lock that's being used. And in the regulation in both Canada and in the United States, it says, and keep in mind, enforcement folks are literal, and the regulation says that you must have integral locking systems on the corners of the container. So this lock was being used that you see in the picture, and the question came in, can they use that lock because it's not in the extreme corner? The answer is yes, they can. In fact, that one, according to the rail industry, is more structurally solid than the one at the front. So the guidance basically explains that yes, as long as you have 2 corner locks on either side, then you don't necessarily have to be in the extreme corners. And then this one was a little strange. I won't lie. This one came in and it came in from an inspector, I believe in Virginia, and it pulled into the scale this way. So if you can see it real close, you'll see a pintle hook up on top on the power unit, and the drawbar and the eye are underneath the bumper of the truck. That's how it came into the scale. So I don't know how it stayed together. It was wedged underneath the truck. You can see the safety chains are attached, but the truck, the trailer itself was not in the pintle hook. So again, when it came to the point of putting this vehicle out of service, the inspector said there was nothing in the out of service that said that I can put him out of service when they're just not together. Yes, we have out of service for a damaged pintle hook. We have out of service for a damaged eye. We have a out of service for the latch not being in place, but nothing for not using one with the other when required. So strange as it may seem, they put that in there and said latch not secured or being used as required. So in that particular case, that's what you see there. I don't know that anyone will ever see that again, to be honest, because if they do, most of the time when that happens, one is not connected to the other anymore. However, that led to another conversation. And there's another section in the out of service criteria in coupling devices that talks about all other hitch systems, excluding fifth wheel and pintle hooks. So now you're talking about pin hitches, you're talking about ball hitches, everything else. So same thing. They said, well, if we're going to put it in there for pintle hooks and eyes, we better put it in there for ball hitches and latches. So we did. Then the conversation moved towards a mismatched ball and hitch because inspectors have seen that a lot. I'll be honest, they usually find it in a post-crash situation. So now they've come apart and they go and they look and you've got a 1 7/8 ball with a 2 5/8 receiver. So they talked about the fact that if you've got a mismatched ball and hitch, that should be in the out of service as well. So they added that. The problem is when you're dealing with ball hitches, as you know, on top of the ball itself is where you find the measurement of the ball. So you'll see there in that picture, you can see that that ball is 2 5/16. And you can also see on the drawbar that that drawbar is 2 5/16 ball. So you know those two need to be married together. However, when they're married together, I can't see the top of the ball. So a few things. One, if the drawbar itself is not marked, roadside, an enforcement person cannot enforce this out of service criteria, to be honest. They will have no way of knowing what size ball needs to go inside of that hitch. But this is just examples of how you determine what size ball is required for that hitch. Then on the ball itself, you may be able to see it. You can kind of see it in that middle picture. And at the last one, you can't see it at all. It's worn. So the only way they're going to be able to determine the dimension of that one is to measure it. So then the next question was, and I'm going to play this video, but it is a bit choppy on a webinar, but when this type of combination is being inspected, 9 times out of 10, this trailer will have electric brakes. This one does. You can see the breakaway there. So we do get the driver to pull ahead and back to check the brakes. You also saw in that ball hitch there a bunch of slop, if you could see it, if it wasn't too choppy. So when they do that type of pull ahead and back, if they see that kind of slop, and that is a 1 7/8 ball with a 2 5/16 hitch, if they see that play observed, if it's the ball itself and the nut is loose, then we already have that for out of service criteria. So then they just place the vehicle out of service for a loose ball hitch. However, if there's excessive play and the ball hitch is not loose and the hitch is not marked, they cannot go any further. They have to know what size ball is supposed to be going in that hitch. If the hitch is marked so that they can determine what size ball hitch is required, then they're going to place chalk blocks ahead and behind the trailer wheels. They're going to have the driver lower the trailer jack to raise the hitch enough to uncouple the trailer, and have the driver raise the hitch from the ball high enough to examine the ball hitch. But only when you see that sort of excessive play when you're doing the inspection. And there is at this point no measurable amount of play in the ball hitch itself. There is for fifth wheel. So in fifth wheel, and it's been there as long as I ever inspected trucks, it's a 1/2 inch play between the upper and lower halves of the fifth wheel. We do not have a measurable play. We're working on it, but we don't have it at this point. So and so in that particular case, if the agency has a policy that they will not disconnect truck from trailer, they will never be able to apply that out of service criteria at roadside. It will simply be a post-crash thing. So when they go to the crash and the trailer's over there and the truck's over there, then they will look at the ball hitch and they will look at the drawbar and potentially add that as part of the reason that the crash happened, or at least part of the reason why they uncoupled. Then it got into this conversation about lights. And I was telling Steve and Mark before we started, a lot of times things come into the out of service or come into the committee because I find out that it's being done one way in one state or province and being done another way in another. And then I start making phone calls and I find out 50% of the inspectors are reading it one way and 50% are reading it the other way. That is not fair to industry at all. So when I find out that's happening, then I make a statement to the committee chair and I say, we need to add something to this. And 50% of the people in the committee will lose and 50% of the committee will win, whatever they were doing. So in this particular case, it doesn't look like a lot of change, but when it says headlights, taillights, and projecting load lamps, when lights are required to be on. So obviously that's at night, okay? That to some people meant if you're driving down the road and it's 11 o'clock at night and the driver forgot to turn his lights on, then he's out of service because his headlamps and his tail lamps will not be on. In other cases, people were saying, no, that still doesn't mean the lights aren't working. So he's not out of service unless they're not working. So the long and the short was they came up with, it should not be an out of service condition unless they don't work. So that little bracket was put in there, does not include lamps that are not turned on. So in this particular case, here's an example. Truck pulls into the scale or the inspection location, and that's what it looks like at the back, and it's nighttime. I already mentioned when an inspector starts his inspection, he gets the driver to release his brakes, shocks the wheels, turns the key, and the first thing I do is walk around the front and I say, put your lights on. So he turns his lights on and on they come. If that's what I see, he is probably going to get a ticket under state law for driving without his lights on. That's a given, likely, because any enforcement officer at 11 at night driving down a truck that's black on the back is going to have a problem. But he is not going to get violations for those lights not working, unless once he turns his lights on, that's what you still see. Now he's going to get violations for no turn signals, well, not necessarily turn signals, but no tail lights, no ID lights, no clearance lights, whatever's not working. So if everything comes on like you see there, at best, the driver should get a state law violation for not having his lights on when required.
That's a driver violation or equipment violation?
That'll be a driver violation. That's a driver beat him over the head because he should have had his lights on violation. And then at the end of the lighting section, this was another one. And this one's still being debated, but for this year, this is what it is. So in 393.11, there's a table, and it talks about all the prescribed lights in the United States. There's also a table in Canada, same table. And it talks about the fact that your headlights, your taillights, your turn signals, there's all a required height, color, and position of them. So if they're not within the required height or they're not the right color, again, some people were saying then they're missing. I'm going to put you out of service because they're not where they're supposed to be. And other people were saying, no, I only have a violation. So in this particular case, the vehicle committee decided that if the light is working and it's not meeting the height, color, or position requirement, it is a violation, but it's not out of service. So in 393.11, you'll see there headlamps, there's the required height, 22 to 54 inches. Similarly, stop lamps, 15 to 72 inches, turn signals, 15 to 83 inches. Position as far apart as practicable. And then there's your color of lenses, okay? So in this particular case, I stopped this vehicle and his taillights are 90 inches above the ground, too high. So it's a violation because the table says they have to be no more than 72 inches, but I'm not going to put them out of service. Similarly, I have a light and it's supposed to be red. Tail lamps are supposed to be red, and for whatever reason, there's an amber lens on it instead. Again, it is a violation, but not out of service at this point. I don't know whether it'll stay that way because there's a lot of pushback on that one, and it may change in future years. This is probably the biggest change, I would say. So in tire section, in all other tires, so excluding front axle tires, but all other tires, and it's mainly around automatic tire inflation systems. So if you have a tire that is not equipped with an operable automatic tire inflation system, nothing really has changed. If you have an audible leak, you're out of service. Or if the tire is less than 50% of the, or 50% or less of the maximum inflation pressure, then you're out of service, okay? Nothing's really changed if you don't have an automatic tire inflation system. However, there was a new section added. So now you've got a tire that has an automatic tire inflation system. If you have a tire that has an audible leak in the tread area only, then you will be in violation because the 393.75 still says you can't have a leaking tire. So the violation will still be written on your inspection report, but the difference is if the automatic tire inflation system is working and the vehicle is checked and the tire inflation is checked and it's above that 50% mark, then that tire will not be placed out of service. If the leak is in the sidewall, all bets are off. The rule is the same. But in the tread area, so you got a small puncture hole, nail in the tire, whatever the case may be, that's not saying you can operate with that tire for the next 52 days. That is saying that you will be cited for it and you have till the next redispatch to get it fixed.
So it's still a violation.
Still a violation, just not stuck on the side of the road fixing that tire. You can go to the end of your trip and get it fixed back at the yard, whatever the case may be. So in this particular case, here's the example. You've got a screw in the tire or a nail in the tire and it's leaking. If that's what you have, then I will not place you out of service if the tire inflation system is working. Another really important bulletin is the 2023-02 automatic tire inflation system bulletin. A lot of inspectors don't know how they work, and a lot of inspectors were afraid to disconnect them to take that tire pressure. So they need to be taught, and make sure you tell your drivers to read this bulletin, because if your drivers don't know how to do it, a lot of them have the dual check valve. So all you got to do is take the tire pressure gauge and attach it, and you don't have to take anything apart. But some of them don't. And all it requires is hand pressure. So in the bulletin, it does say to have the driver remove it if necessary, because inspectors don't do anything to motor carriers' equipment. So make sure if your drivers don't know how to take tire pressure, if you have ATIS, that they read that bulletin so that they know. And another good thing is a lot of the ATIS systems, they have that warning light on the front of the trailer. So when it comes on, the driver needs to know that his automatic tire inflation system became active. So he needs to pull over and he needs to look to see if he can find out where that tire is. Because if it all of a sudden actuates while he's driving down the road, he needs to stop and figure it out so he knows what tire to take in for repair when he gets to where he's going. So the bulletin itself talks about how it operates. The other thing that I wanted to point out to you, there are certain ATIS systems out there that have, and you'll see that black box on the right-hand side. They are designed to inflate and deflate tires based on the load on the trailer. So again, if you have that type of ATIS system, and this happened, and I didn't know they existed until it happened, if a trailer goes from fully loaded to completely empty, and then all of a sudden gets pulled over for an inspection, which is what happened, those tires will deflate for over an hour. So the entire time that inspector is doing the inspection, air is coming out of that black box. The inspector doesn't know the difference, so they thought that that black box was leaking brake pressure, suspension pressure, something else, and wrote it up as a violation. In fact, what's coming out of that black box is air from the tires. So we are constantly trying to educate the inspectors on all of this new technology, and I'm constantly trying to tell all these new technology people to come and talk to us first so that these violations don't happen roadside, so that we can get the information out there proactively. But 95% of the time, it's reactive. So that's where the air comes out. It exhausts from the tires. If that's what you have, make sure your drivers know that, in case there's an inspector out there that has not read that bulletin, so that they can educate them. And there, it talks about that warning light that I mentioned earlier. So drivers need to know about that stuff so that they can tell their fleet folks that their ATIS light is on. A lot of them will transmit wirelessly back to the fleet anyway. So the fleet people will know that it's activated, and it only activates when you've got a problem with a leak in a tire. And then the guidance that I mentioned earlier, there's a dual check. So there's no requirement to take anything apart there. But if that dual check valve is not there, then they have to unscrew the coupling at the wheel end. And you can do that. It's not unsafe to do that, but drivers need to know how to do that. And if it's got a tire inflation monitoring system, again, there's a lot of dual checks. Nothing has to come apart. So sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So if the driver knows what kind of system he has, then he or she has, then it'll be no problem at all doing whatever the inspector asks of them. So then the rest of it was just basically the tire section had to be renumbered because we added that new one in there. So everything else correlated down. Also in the out of service handbook, if you get them, the driver's license chart for Canada was updated. There were a few modifications to some of the provinces, particularly when it comes to their endorsements and restrictions. The ABS anti-lock brake inspection bulletin flow chart was updated. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is that if you guys have drivers that don't understand how to inspect their ABS, it is probably one of the highest violations out there on trailers, not so much tractors as trailers. So this flow chart is the exact flow chart that inspectors use. And it's not always as simple as turning the key. Depending on whether you have full-time power tractors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you have an old tractor, I was teaching an industry course last week and they had a 1995 tractor with a 2000 18 trailer. The only way to check ABS on that trailer is to put the foot on the brake to make sure that the trailer ABS cycles, because the tractor doesn't have it. So you need to know all that stuff based on years, and this flow chart does that for you. The
And
level one,
and that's universal. That's
Universal.
US, Canada.
Yeah.
That's
the only difference
that's
between US and Canada, if you flip that flow chart around, there is a Canadian flag on the backside. The only difference is Canada was late to the game, so the manufacturing date is older. That's the only difference. And then the level one inspection was changed because we found out there are some ABS systems that if you don't have max pressure in the system, they will give you a false read. The fault light will come on and there's nothing wrong with the ABS malfunction lamp. So we moved ABS to step 13 because at the beginning, like I'd already mentioned, in those 6 steps, one of them is to get the truck at max pressure before you start the inspection. That's the place where they should be checking the ABS malfunction lamp. And they used to check it when they were at the back of the trailer because they're standing there staring at it. So now it gets done at a different location. These are things that, and I was mentioning to Steve and Mark, there are things on our member portal that you can download and use for driver training, whatever you want. And this is probably one of the things I get asked for the most. If you are accustomed to looking at the out of service criteria handbook, at the back, you will see this pictorial, and it's got all kinds of defective pictures for all the different critical inspection items and all the different brake systems, cargo, et cetera, et cetera. So 19 new pictures were added to the pictorial, but you can download all the pictures from the pictorial, plus ones that I've taken out over the years because I leave them all in our learning management system so people can download them and use them at will. So those were added in there. And this is what the pictorial looks like in the back of the out of service criteria handbook. So you'll see, like one of the ones that I just added in there was that B3 broken universal joint bearing strap on that first picture in the top picture in the middle. So all of these pictures, there's something that I've added this year. And it's just, some of our pictures are, I think they're still like old Polaroids in some cases. So when I get new pictures from inspectors at roadside and they're better quality pictures now, I'm just ripping one out and inserting a better picture. And the out of service criteria handbooks, if you're not familiar with them, there are many different types of formats you can get. The first one on the left is the actual handbook itself. A lot of people still like the handbook. They like something in their hands to look at. The next one over is an electronic version of the handbook, and you get 3 copies of that. And you can put it on like a computer, a tablet, and wherever, 3 different computers within your business. And then there's a Spanish version, an English-Spanish version, a French-Canadian version, and an English-French-Canadian version. So those are all available on our store. And if you buy them, I'm sure you're accustomed to them. The other thing, probably my favorite thing, we now have the app. So I don't carry a book anymore. I have it on my app. You'll see it there on that phone at the bottom right there. So when you get the app, you can just buy it off a Google Store. You can buy it off Apple Store. It has, the nice thing I like about it is once I start getting the out of services, they never leave. So you can see I've got 2021, 22, 23, 24 on my phone, and they're forever there. So I can see what the changes are. And you can log in if you are a member from the app. You can get, another really good thing on the app is the emergency declarations portal that we have. It is available on our website on the public side as well. This became really prevalent during COVID, but still, even last year with the fires and tornadoes and everything else that's going on, if you're going state to state and you want to know if there's any emergency declarations in any of the states, you can look to see if the state you're going to, are there any exemptions that maybe you can take advantage of, or are there any? So, and you can go country to country, state to state. And inspection bulletins, I mentioned a lot of them, but all of these, like a lot of these were revised in 2023. You'll see that below. And then the ones up top, they are new. So they are outlined in the out of service criteria handbook as to when they came out or when they were revised. I wanted to let you know that they're available on the public side of the website. So this is our main page of the website here. If you click on inspections on the main page, it will take you to an inspections page, and then you'll see inspection bulletins, and then they come up in order of category. So part one of the out of service criteria is all the driver and vehicle credential stuff. One of the ones I always point out to industry, if you are accustomed to running electronic documents, you should download that 2021-05 acceptance of electronic documents and put it in the truck for the driver, because there's a lot of not certified inspectors out there that could stop your truck for speeding in the city. And if he's got electronic registration or electronic logs, anything, they might not know that. So that one dictates all the things that can be electronic that a driver can carry, which is pretty much everything. Anything required in 390 to 399 in the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations can be electronic in nature. The one thing that can't be at this point in the US is the shipping document for hazardous materials, but pretty much everything else can be. But I can't guarantee you that every single inspector out there knows that. So that's the one I always point out to industry. If you are electronic in nature, you might want to carry that one around. And then in our CVSA learning, we have a lot of courses, and those are my badges on the right-hand side. So you can see I've taken a lot of them. And then if you go into the roads, there's a CDL section, which talks about masking and talks about CDL disqualifications. There's webinars. There's some really good human trafficking stuff in there. And then if you go to the hazmat section, if you are in the hazmat world, there's all kinds of webinars in regard to different hazardous materials. There's a ton of training. If you carry class 3, class 7, lithium batteries are a big thing these days. So there's courses in there that you can take. And then cargo tank stuff and infectious substance stuff, that became kind of a big deal through COVID as well. So there was a lot of courses built out then. General HM refreshers, 1, 2, 3. A lot of them are for inspectors, but there's no reason in the world that the motor carrier industry can't take them. There's videos in there. And then in the roadside side of the LMS, all of these, like that practical air brake course is an 8-hour course. I would recommend every driver take that course. It gives you way more information than what an inspector even needs to know. But when I built that out, I won't lie, I learned stuff. So it was a really good course for me to build because I learned a lot. The level 2 inspection, that's also really good for motor carrier industry because you get probably more level 2s than you do level 1s. So that one is about an hour and a half, and you just go through and you see all the steps of a level 2. So your drivers have an idea of what it is going to happen to them when they get a level 2 inspection done. And when you do go through them, you get a badge and you also get a certificate. So you could have that downloaded and sent to a boss or whatever for them to prove that they took it. There's all sorts of videos on there. Some of these videos you can actually get on Vimeo as well. So you can watch them. The one down in the far right corner, the North American Standard Inspection for Industry, that one is built specifically from the view of the driver. So it talks about what the inspector is going to get you to do as the driver throughout a level 1 inspection. And they come in French. Some of them come in Spanish. And this one, the CMV traffic enforcement, that gives you just kind of an overview, that one, of what a non-certified police officer may do when they pull you over. So they're not certified to do level 1s, level 2s, but we're trying to train more enforcement agencies out there how to be familiar and comfortable around big trucks, because they're not. If they're not certified to inspect them, they kind of stay away from them. And we need them to deal with trucks on a minimalistic standpoint without doing inspections. And they come in French as well. Also, every single bulletin I talked about is also a small course. So you'll see 5 minutes, 11 minutes, 8 minutes, 12 minutes. We have found out, and it was through COVID mostly, that when we put things out that people have to read, they don't want to read. But they don't mind watching me talk about it for 8 minutes and then take a little quiz at the end and get their badge and get their little certificate. So whatever way we can get the messages out there, we're trying to do it in a variety of ways so people can pick their own thing. UCR, that was our newest one in January 2024. It comes out the first of every year, letting the motor carrier industry know if there's any delays in UCR fee enforcement. There has not been in the last few years. So there's all the older ones. So you could pick your pick your poison, pick your information that you want to review. Same thing with our operational policies. Every single time we change an operational policy, there's a little course to let people know. Inspection bitch videos, our motor carrier industry, they love these things. I like them too. We put one out every month. They are, in a lot of cases, inspectors that find things roadside, and they're literally maybe a minute long, maybe a minute and a half at best. And they're all different topics about all different kinds of things. Some are telling inspectors not to write a violation that we're finding out they are, and some of them are inspectors that find something roadside that they want everybody to see, and it's just little learning snippets. So quick fixes, same thing. These are things where we have found inspectors are not doing it appropriately, or I get the same question 3 times, and when I get it 3 times, I realize that if 3 people are asking me, there's probably about 3,000 of them that don't know exactly how to do it. So the fraudulent LFC one is the most recent, in U.S. personal conveyance. Those are 2 that one of my coworkers, Jeremy Disbrow, did. He tries to explain U.S. personal conveyance. It's probably one of the most confusing things out there for interpretation. So he went back and forth with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration several times to get different types of interpretations and put that in that course. It's 30 minutes long. And then the fraudulent LFC is more, and industry likes that one as well, because if you're hiring Mexican drivers with an LFC, make sure that you're not getting a fraudulent one, because there's a lot of them out there. So this gives you kind of tips on how to determine whether there's a fraudulent LFC or not. And then there's different ones on where to put tie downs on cargo, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the last 2 that are recent. And you'll get these lovely badges when you take the quick fix courses. And last but not least, on the roadside page. So basically what I just went through today, I had done this back in January to our membership. And so any webinars that I do or anyone else does, they get recorded just like you guys are recording this one today. And we post it on our website in the roadside portal about 2 days after the webinar for those that missed it.
Right.
And also, if you ever want, if you're in there, the recording is there, and so is the PowerPoint. I always put the PowerPoint in there so that people can download it, because I want them to use the PowerPoint to push the message out to whoever can't look at the webinar, or you want to pick and pull slides out to focus on something specific. And that is it. And I have 13 minutes left according to my clock, Steve.
Very good. Carrie, thank you very much. That was some really good, outstanding information. And we do have some questions here, and I'm going to try to take these as they came in. First question came from Rick. Rick says, can a driver haul hazmat with an endorsement and medical card, even if the state hasn't updated their website yet? For example, he has the card in his possession, but website hasn't been updated yet.
Yes, he can still carry the medical card, because some of the SDLAs have not got where they need to get yet. So if that is one of those states, he should have the hazmat endorsement on his license, though. It's the medical card that's being implemented at this point. So carry the medical card around with you, should be okay.
Very good. Very good. Another question. Why do inspectors write 3 different violations for a single bulb being out? A single bulb that serves as a tail light, turn signal, and brake light that goes out should be written up, but I don't think it's fair that it gets 3 different violations. Can't the inspector just pick any one of the 3?
Therein lies the problem. The inspector can't. So that policy is being worked on right now, and I understand what that person is saying. But the inspector has to look for 2 brake lights, left and right turn signal, and tail lights. And if that light is shared by all 3, yes, you will get a violation for the tail light, a violation for the brake light, and you'll be placed out of service for the turn signal. It's just the way it is because of how the table is written. And if you've only got 1 bulb, if you've got 3, the new trailers have 3, and that generally doesn't happen anymore. But when you have one that serves 3 purposes, I mean, in theory, you could also get a hazard light violation as well. It's just the way it is.
All right. Here's a question from Jose, and this relates to the topic you were talking about with the tire inflation systems. Jose wanted to know, can air pressure be measured from the black box?
It can't be measured from the black box, but it can be measured from anywhere else in the system. Like at the end of the thermoplastic hose, you can go in there and it should tell you what the system pressure is in both the tires and the system itself. So
measuring the system is a driver responsibility,
yes,
not an inspector's responsibility.
correct. Yes.
So,
Now,
so
only if you have to take it apart. Like if I'm doing an inspection and it's got the dual check valve on it, and all I have to do is put my tire pressure gauge up to it, because I'm going to check the tire pressure. I have to check it as an inspector. I can't get the driver to check it and tell me that it's like 75 PSI. More so the other way around. If I'm going to put a driver out of service, I need to know what that tire pressure was, because I'm going to document it and it's part of my evidence.
Very good. Another question, somebody's curious, how much is the membership to CVSA? And it says, once a member, will you have access to all of this, the app, the handbook, etc.?
You don't have access to the app and the handbook, no. You get a free handbook as a member annually. It's currently $750 a year for the entire company. So that's not a person, that's a company. So let's say the three of us all work for ABC Trucking and we all have an email that ends with ABC Trucking. Anybody with that email, as soon as the company registers as a member, all of those people can get into the member side of the portal through that email
That's
access.
very good. Very good. Here's a question from Preston. Will the FMCSA ever provide better guidance on personal conveyance? I know roadside inspectors are having a difficult time with this topic.
That's $1 million question. I mean, we do the best we can. We have asked several times. I don't know if you're aware, but CVSA has petitioned FMCSA 4 times now to change and do something about personal conveyance, and we've been denied 4 times. So right now we are collecting data on personal conveyance at roadside. We've got inspectors that are targeted to pull data. How many times are they finding hours of service violations, false logs with use of personal conveyance? How many times a day is a driver using personal conveyance? Because the last time we were told, you know, we had to come up with data before we go back again and ask again. So we are collecting data in that regard to try and prove how vast of use personal conveyance is. Because honestly, most motor carriers that I talk to, they either A, don't let their drivers use it at all, or B, they're frustrated because it isn't consistent across the board. And so you run the risk all the time of using it and then having a problem at roadside. And I get all that. And I can tell you from my perspective in Canada, it was pretty easy. You could go 50 miles a day and you had to be unladen, the end. So if I stopped the guy and he was laden, it didn't matter if he had personal conveyance or not, he couldn't use it. And he used it to go to dinner. Like he used it, he would bobtail to dinner, he would do this or that. So it was very easy for me to enforce it because it was pretty much black and white. And they seem to get along up here doing it. I don't know. It wasn't a problem. So I know it's being used to an extreme in some cases. And the downside is if you allow your drivers to use it to an extreme and something happens, it's all going to fall back on the motor carrier for allowing it to happen, unfortunately.
if you allow the driver to do his own interpretation, correct?
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
that's something that we really push
Yeah.
to do custom content
Like
that
it's
you as a
very
carrier need to
difficult.
define. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you're letting your drivers operate 3, 4, 5 hours a day on personal day, if you look at fatigue, it just doesn't make sense to allow that. So if something happens, I don't know what the civil liability of that would be.
Substantial.
Yeah, I think so. Couple other questions. Here's one from Dean. Dean's asking, can a company require that any truck with a port has to run an ELD no matter the year of the truck?
No, it's pretty clear in the federal hours or federal regulation. And I mean, a company can do anything, but it's the model year 2000. So model year or engine 2000, and that's what will be enforced at roadside. If they choose to go back before that, because of a company wants you to run it, that's between you and the company.
Company. Okay. Here's a question from Debbie's. We have a lot of ABS malfunctions, light defective, tractor trailers, same on trailers. How do we check to ensure the light is working?
So that's what I mentioned earlier. My best suggestion to you is go onto the website, download the 2013 O2 bulletin for ABS inspections. And at the very back of it, you'll find a flow chart, that flow chart that I showed you in the slide, and get your drivers to understand and learn how to follow the flow, because it's pretty simple to do once you know. I will readily admit, though, if you've got a tractor trailer combination that you can't use the key on, key off to check, in some cases, your driver's going to have to get some help, because the full-time power tractors, the only way to check it once you plug the trailer in is to unplug the pigtail and plug it back in. The problem is when you're unplugging the pigtail and plug it back in, you're between the tractor and trailer, so you can't see the function of the ABS light back there while you're plugging it in at the same time. So you need a buddy, somebody to plug in, plug out, and an inspector can see that, right? Because he's standing back while the driver is unplugging and plugging back in, so they can check that. I think that is probably where some drivers are getting hung up. The other thing that I learned in an industry course recently, so check this. If your brake pedal is functioning that trailer ABS malfunction lamp and you have a new tractor, it is not correct. It is wrong, and it is not getting the power to the ABS malfunction lamp on the trailer through the constant power cord. It is getting it from the brake pedal. So if that's what's happening, it's not functioning as it should be, and an inspector will write you up for that. The other thing I found out was if you've got a light check system that goes around the entire unit and checks all the lights and flashes them all, make sure that the ABS malfunction lamp is not flashing with your light check and it's tricking you, it's doing it with the chuck test. So when you turn the key, it should function right away, not 5 seconds later when the light system is going around, because you may get the bulb might not be out, so your light's functioning, but your signal between the tractor and the trailer is not functioning.
Very good. One last question. This comes from Carol. She's asking, can non-members download the ABS flowchart?
Yes. So on my slides there, I showed you on the home page, if you go to inspections across the blue tab at the top, it'll take you to a different page. And then down the side, it'll be inspection bulletins. Click on there, go find 2013 O2, grab that bulletin, and it's the last page of the bulletin is the flow chart.
Fantastic. Very good. Not seeing any other questions. One of the things that I just wanted to throw in here, we've talked about, oh, sorry, here's another message coming in. No, never mind. Obviously it's important to make sure that personnel in the trucking company, the drivers, are trained about these out of service issues. So training is very important to make sure we're not just unknowledgeable about something that causes us to get put out of service or the truck. So it's important to do training, and I'm going to pop up a little poll here for any of you folks out there that are not current customers of ours and would like to learn a little bit more about how we could help you provide training to your drivers out there to get them up to speed on these things. We would love to reach out to you. Some of you have asked about content we currently have in our catalog, and we have a lot of content that relates to a lot of the out of service issues that we were talking about here. But also keep in mind, if you're a CVSA member, you have access to a lot of videos and such that you can download, correct, Carrie?
Some of them you can download off Vimeo, some of them you can't, but they can certainly watch them all and play them through their own internal systems, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, so if it's something that's downloadable from CVSA, that could actually, you could put that in as a piece of custom content in your system to make sure you can assign it out. So we have come to an hour, Carrie, and I really truly appreciate your message this morning. A lot of really good information. I think we've answered a few questions, and I would assume there are further questions after today. If they wanted to reach out to you, that's not going to be a
Absolutely.
problem.
Nope, not at all.
So wait, here's one last question, and then we'll go.
Okay.
Says this is from Phil. Phil took the CVSA course level 1 with Carrie last week and highly recommend it to all safety directors. So
Hi.
that's awesome. Fantastic.
Steve, I'd also like to remind everyone that CVSA facilitates Road Check, which is right around the corner. And for all the clients that are still on, if you need to get some content out this afternoon or this week on brakes, air brakes, and I think Clearinghouse is another focus point for Road Check this year. And we appreciate what CVSA does for our industry. I'd also like everybody, let's send a thank you to Carrie for what she does. CVSA is a industry partner, an enforcement partner, and puts it together and does a lot to make our highways safer. So let's give her a big thank you.
Very good. All right. Well, once again, Carrie, thank you very much. Appreciate all your great information. We hope to have you at some point in the future to get some more updates from you. We got a lot of people thanking you, Carrie. So thanks for being here today. Mark, thanks for joining us. Thank you to everybody out there for joining the webinar today, and we'll look forward to having you on our next program.
Okay.
Carrie, thank you much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All
Bye.
right. Bye, everybody.